Good day, everyone. For this presentation, I'll be presenting Sikolohiyang Pilipino or Filipino Psychology, a legacy of Virgilio G. Enriquez. The history of psychology in the Philippines was largely influenced by Western theories and methods during the colonial periods under Spain and the USA. Filipino intellectuals like Rizal and Apolinario Mabini expressed dissatisfaction with Western interpretations of Filipino behavior. This, dis- this dissatisfaction persisted as Filipinos sought to establish their national and cultural identity. In the 1960s, Filipino scholars began to question the Western-centric approach to psychology, particularly in the study of personality. The Western approach often depicted Filipino behavior as judgmental and impressionistic, leading to misunderstandings of their communication style as dishonest. This comparison to Western behavior patterns continued to undermine the native Filipino identity. However, it wasn't until the early 1970s that a concerted effort to reject and correct the traditional Western approach to psychology was initiated. Virgilio Enriquez introduced the concept of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Together with Dr. Alfredo V. Lagmay, they researched the historical and cultural roots of Philippine psychology, identified indigenous concepts and approaches, and fostered creativity among Filipinos. This effort resulted in a two-volume bibliography on Filipino psychology and the development of a locally produced personality test called Panukat ng Ugali at Pagkatao, or Measure of Character and Personality. In 1975, Enriquez chaired the first national conference on Filipino psychology, where the ideas, concepts, and formulations of Sikolohiyang Pilipino were formally articulated, marking a significant shift towards a more culturally relevant and indigenous approach to psychology in the Philippines. So now, what is Sikolohiyang Pilipino? Sikolohiyang Pilipino is a psychology approach rooted in Filipino thought and experience, emphasizing the Filipino perspective. It challenges the inaccuracies and distortions created by analyzing Filipino behavior through Western theories. Sikolohiyang Pilipino aims to understand the essence of the Filipino psyche, including awareness, motives, and behavior. Critics have questioned the appropriateness of Western models in understanding third world cultures like the Philippines. Psikolohiyang Pilipino is not anti-universal. Its goal is to contribute to universal psychology by understanding each group from their own perspective. Initially, efforts focused on translating Western concepts into Filipino, including modifying psychological tests. However, this approach failed to capture a truly Filipino psychology. The emphasis then shifted to indigenization from within, which involves seeking indigenous psychology within Filipino culture, not just dressing up foreign ideas in local terms. This approach led to the development of indigenous concepts and methods. Sikolohiyang Pilipino primarily aims to foster national identity, social involvement, and the study of language and culture. It has practical applications in various aspects of daily life, including health, agriculture, art, mass media, religion, and more. Virgilio Enriquez, a native of the Philippines, had a strong foundation in the Filipino language thanks to his father's efforts. His education was initially in English, but he began using Filipino in his teaching at the University of the Philippines in the 1960s. While pursuing a master's and later a PhD in psychology in the United States, he witnessed the growing nationalism in the Philippines and decided to promote Filipino-oriented teaching and research upon his return in 1971. Enriquez established the Philippine Psychology Research House, or PPRH, which later became the Philippine Psychology Research and Training House, or PPRTH, amassing over 10,000 references related to Psikolohiyang Pilipino. He influenced students to write their papers in Filipino, contributing to the growth of the national language. He held teaching positions at various institutions, both in the Philippines and abroad, and authored numerous publications covering indigenous psychology, Filipino personality, language and politics, cross-cultural psychology, and Philippine studies. Throughout his life, Enriquez received several awards and recognition for his contributions to Sikolohiyang Pilipino and Asian psychology. Notably, he was posthumously awarded the National Achievement in the Social Sciences Award in 1997 for his outstanding contributions to the social sciences in the Philippines. Now I'll be discussing the basic elements and features of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Virgilio Enriquez made a significant contribution to the Sikolohiyang Pilipino movement by providing clarity on its definition and direction. He distinguished Sikolohiyang Pilipino or Filipino psychology from Psikolohiya sa Pilipinas or psychology in the Philippines and Psikolohiya ng mga Pilipino or psychology of the Filipinos. Enriquez's approach involved searching Filipino culture and history for the foundations of Sikolohiyang Pilipino rather than relying on Western theories. He expanded the definition of psychology to include the study of emotions and experience knowledge, or kalooban and kamalayan, awareness of one's surroundings, or ulirat, information and understanding, or isip, habits and behavior, another meaning of diwa, and the soul, or kaluluwa. This broader perspective helped shape the direction of the movement and provided a more culturally relevant framework for understanding psychology from a Filipino perspective. Zeus Salazar, a historian, identified four affiliations of Philippine psychology. First, academic scientific psychology. This follows the Western tradition, particularly the American tradition, which entered Philippine universities around the late 19th century during the birth of scientific psychology. Second, academic philosophical psychology. This also follows the Western tradition but has clerical influences. It was primarily pursued by the University of Santo Tomas and later other educational institutions, aligning psychology with Thomistic philosophy. Third, ethnic psychology. This serves as a major foundation for Sikolohiyang Pilipino by integrating elements from the academic scientific and academic philosophical traditions into a national psychology and philosophy tradition. It includes indigenous psychology, derived from Filipino language, culture, and literature, psychological systems developed by Filipinos using indigenous elements, observations of Filipino psychology by foreigners, and the practice of psychology by Filipinos, including enculturation and proto-clinical techniques. Fourth, psychomedical system, with religion as a cohesive element and explanatory factor. This stream of psychology involves the integration of psychological practices with religious beliefs, often with the focus on healing and well-being. The major characteristics of Sikolohiyang Pilipino as an indigenous Asian psychology. Sikolohiyang Pilipino, as defined by Enriquez, draws on various philosophical antecedents, including empirical philosophy, rational philosophy, and liberalism. Its primary emphasis is on identity, national consciousness, social awareness, psychology of language and culture, and practical applications in fields like health, agriculture, art, mass media, and religion. The methodology of Sikolohiyang Pilipino promotes a cross-indigenous approach, multi-method, multi-language approach, appropriate field methods, and a total approach or triangulation method. It opposes psychology that perpetuates colonialism, exploitation, and the imposition of foreign psychologies on third world countries. In terms of psychological practice, it advocates contextualizing psychological practice within the Philippine context, such as livelihood psychology and health psychology. It also acknowledges folk practices and indigenous healing techniques. Sikolohiyang Pilipino values both scientific and humanistic approaches, developing psychology as both a science and an art. It embraces both mentalism and behaviorism, but places greater importance on collective experiences over individual experiences, and emphasizes concepts like kamalayan or psyche. While Sikolohiyang Pilipino is not opposed to universal psychology or Western theories and methods, it opposes the indiscriminate imposition of Western knowledge and aims to contribute to the development of a universal psychology. Virgilio Enriquez advocated for Sikolohiyang Pilipino to break free from Western perspectives, not only in theory and method, but also in practical applications. He replaced clinical and industrial psychology with fields like health psychology, livelihood psychology, rural psychology, psychology of the arts, and more. This approach aimed to make Sikolohiyang Pilipino more relevant and responsible to the needs of Filipinos, focusing on making psychology beneficial and service-oriented. Enriquez promoted an interdisciplinary approach, encouraging collaboration with various disciplines to strengthen Sikolohiyang Pilipino and make it more closely aligned with Philippine reality. His belief was that psychology should not be confined to psychologists alone, but should involve diverse fields to address the complexity of Filipino experiences and challenges. Now let's head on to the development of indigenous concepts and theories. A significant amount of literature exists on the Filipino personality, often studied by foreign scholars who didn't fully immerse themselves in the culture. Their interpretations of Filipino values, influenced by Western ideas, made their way into Philippine textbooks, creating a distorted or inaccurate portrayal of the Filipino personality. Enriquez criticized the conventional approach to studying Filipino values, which often relied on Western interpretations. He urged Filipino scholars to re-examine these values with the Filipino perspective. Three specific values were discussed. First is bahala na. While foreign interpretations labeled it as fatalistic resignation, Sikolohiyang Filipinos saw it as a form of determination and risk-taking. Filipinos use bahala na to pump courage into themselves before facing a challenging situation, demonstrating their readiness and preparation. Second, hiya. Foreign interpretations define it as shame or discomfort in socially unacceptable situations. Sikolohiyang Pilipino recognized various meanings depending on the form, suggesting that hiya is better translated as sense of propriety rather than shame. Third, utang na loob, often translated as debt of gratitude. Sikolohiyang Filipino saw it as a concept of gratitude and solidarity rather than a burden. It emphasized that returning a favor is not always immediate, and it plays a significant role in maintaining ties with one's home community or country. Additionally, Enriquez introduced the concept of pakikipagkapwa, which emphasizes treating others as fellow human beings. This concept is central to Filipino social psychology, emphasizing shared identity and determining the level of interaction between individuals. Enriquez redefined Filipino behavior patterns and value structures, recognizing both colonial or accommodative surface values and confrontative surface values, with core values like kapwa or shared identity. In conclusion, the Filipino personality is a blend of East and West, with external Western influences and internal Asian values at its core, such as difference or authority, modesty, and concern for others. The Psikologya Pilipino perspective highlighted the Filipino propensity for indirect communication. This aspect of Filipino personality emphasizes sensitivity to nonverbal cues, concern for others' feelings, and a preference for truthfulness without causing harm. A key skill emphasized is pakikiramdam, which means shared inner perception. It involves hesitating to react, paying attention to subtle cues, and considering how one would feel in another situation. Pakikiramdam is particularly valuable in Filipino social interactions and rural research. It helps researchers understand the unspoken feelings and attitudes of participants. The indirect communication style in the Filipino culture often involves euphemisms, nonverbal cues, and voice intonations that convey meaning beyond words. While Filipinos take this communication style for granted, foreigners and westernized Filipinos may find it challenging to interpret these indirect messages accurately. In summary, the Psikolohiya Pilipino perspective recognizes the importance of indirect communication in Filipino culture, which emphasizes sensitivity and consideration for others' feelings. However, this communication style can be challenging for non-Filipinos to interpret correctly. Salazar highlights the internality-externality component in the Filipino personality based on indigenous history and culture. In the Filipino language, there are distinct words for concepts like honor, happiness, control, and feel that emphasize this dimension. For example, puri signifies external honor, often associated with physical recognition, while dangal represents internal honor, reflecting one's true worth, character, and achievements. This internality-externality dimension is not unique to Filipinos, but is important to consider when studying the Filipino personality. It helps researchers understand the nuances of Filipino values and perspectives, particularly regarding concepts like honor, happiness, control, and feelings. Enriquez discusses a great cultural divide within Filipino society. On one side are Filipinos who embrace a more mass-oriented lifestyle, engaging in activities like reading comics, listening to radio soap operas, and visiting indigenous healers. On the other side are those who adopt a more elitist perspective, attending cultural performances and looking down on the mass-oriented individuals. This divide extends to their preferences in food, leisure, and entertainment, with the poor often considered bakya or lacking sophistication. While regionalism is not seen as a major divider, cultural differences are significant. Enriquez's concept of this cultural divide is thought-provoking and relevant for both academics and the general public. Enriquez, along with the PPRH, developed the Panukat ng Ugali at Pagkatao or PUP in 1975, a personality assessment tailored to Filipino culture. This test was distinct from Western psychological testing and took into account Filipino understanding and administration procedures. Notably, other Philippine personality measures also shared cross-cultural dimensions. In the 1970s and 1980s, reviews highlighted the challenge of using foreign-made tests and the scarcity of locally developed ones. Despite some progress in local test development, there was a tendency to rely on foreign tests without adaptation. However, there was a growing interest in indigenous psychological measures, expanding from educational psychology tests in the 1950s to personality, creativity, vocational, and other measures in subsequent decades. Enriquez's PUP was a pioneering culturally sensitive instrument in assessing Filipino personality. Sikolohiyang Pilipino had a significant impact on social research methods in the Philippines. In 1975, Carmen Santiago conducted a pioneering study on pagkalalaki, akin to masculinity, under Enriquez's guidance, introducing the pakapakapa approach. This approach challenged traditional research methods by emphasizing the importance of understanding Filipino culture rather than adhering to foreign research designs and literature reviews. Santiago and Enriquez proposed making research more Filipino by using indigenous research methods derived from natural patterns of behavior. 5 guiding principles for indigenous research methods emerged. First, the quality of data depends on the researcher's relationship with the participants, with the minimum requirement of mutual trust and understanding. Second, researchers should treat participants as equals or even superior, encouraging their active involvement in the research process. Third, participants' welfare takes precedence over data collection, with the ethical responsibility of researchers being primarily to the people being studied. Fourth, research methods should be culturally appropriate and adapt to existing norms, showing sensitivity to the population's needs and communication styles. Fifth, the language of research should be the participants' language whenever possible, or local researchers should be involved to facilitate communication. Several indigenous research methods have been identified, including improvised informal interviews, storytelling, collective indigenous discussions, participant observation, getting along with participants, visiting research settings, and residing in research settings. These methods aim to capture the richness of Filipino culture and experience in research. So the impact on the teaching of psychology in the Philippines. In the early 1970s at the University of the Philippines, there was a growing interest in teaching and using the Filipino language in psychology classes. Professors like Freddy Gusto, David, and Amaryllis Torres responded to this call for more relevance to the Filipino masses. Enriquez, upon his return from the United States in 1971, focused on translating psychological materials into Filipino to facilitate teaching psychology in the native language. Initially, students were hesitant to take classes conducted in Filipino, as they were accustomed to using English in previous educational levels. However, over time, students became comfortable with Filipino classes. In 1978, Sikolohiyang Pilipino, a subject focused on Filipino psychology, was introduced at the undergraduate level, with Jose Maria Bartolome and later Rogelia Pepua as instructors. They faced the challenge of not having a textbook, so students and instructors worked together to compile and publish one titled Sikolohiyang Pilipino, Teoria, Metodo at or Filipino Psychology, Theory, Method, and Application. This book contained articles in both Filipino and English, reflecting the language dynamics in the academic setting. Several other compilations and publications related to Sikolohiyang Pilipino followed, and the use of Filipino language became more prevalent at the graduate level. Many theses and doctoral dissertations were written in Filipino, and the UP Department of Psychology offered courses on Philippine psychology at the graduate level, addressing theoretical, scientific, social, and political aspects of the field. Philippine psychology became a distinctive area of concentration in the PhD program at UP, with its first PhD graduates specializing in this. Sikolohiyang Pilipino, the Filipino psychology approach, has found various applications in different areas. Initially, it was used to promote the use of the local language in education, research, and conferences, influencing mass media to adopt it as well. This led to Filipino psychologists being invited to talk shows to discuss its relevance to various topics. In therapy, there were efforts to develop techniques suited to the Filipino personality, such as group counseling and preference for paternalistic counselors. Filipinos were found to be more susceptible to hypnotic suggestions. Another application was providing psychological help to children in challenging situations, addressing both individual needs and the societal roots of their problems. This was exemplified by the work of Elizabeth Botasio Marcelino at the Children's Rehabilitation Center. Feminist psychology also incorporated Sikolohiyang Pilipino principles to help battered women understand their issues within the Philippine socio-cultural context. In industry, Sikolohiyang Pilipino has been used in marketing and understanding consumer behavior. Multinational companies have sought the expertise of the PPRTH to train their personnel. Non-government organizations involved in grassroots leadership formation have developed training modules based on Sikolohiyang Pilipino, proving valuable in their work. The PPRTH is conducting research on Filipino leadership concepts for the Education for Life Foundation. Virgilio Enriquez played an important role in shaping Sikolohiyang Pilipino and its future direction. He initiated various activities, including annual national conferences on Filipino psychology starting in 1975. These conferences led to the formation of the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, or PSSP, the National Association for Filipino Psychology, which aimed to promote Filipino thought. These conferences were held in different regions of the Philippines to encourage wider participation, regional focus, and a national perspective on psychology. They generated valuable information and experiences shared among scholars. Enriquez also established specialized organizations in areas like child psychology, psychology of the arts, psychology of language, and history of psychology, further contributing to the development of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Virgilio Enriquez's extensive travels and temporary residences in various countries allowed him to spread the influence of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. During these journeys, he engaged with both Filipino and foreign scholars, sparkling their interest in Sikolohiyang Pilipino. This collaboration led to the establishment of organizations and associations that supported the principles of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. In the 1970s and 1980s, several of these organizations were formed in the United States, San Francisco and New Haven, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, and Hong Kong. However, following Enriquez's death, only the association in San Francisco, California has continued its activities. Nevertheless, there are still individuals in these countries who maintain their belief in the Sikolohiyang Pilipino orientation and tradition, even if they no longer have formal organizational structures. Sikolohiyang Pilipino has been the subject of significant debate and discussion, with proponents and critics expressing various viewpoints. One of the key debates was initiated by Zeus Salazar, a historian who emphasized the need for a socio-historical perspective in understanding Filipino psychology. While Salazar agreed with some of the basic principles of Psikolohiyang Pilipino, he criticized its inclusion of Filipino Americans in its discourse, arguing that they are not true Filipinos due to their upbringing in the United States. Virgilio Enriquez defended the inclusion of Filipino Americans, arguing that they still possess elements of Filipino cultural identity. Elizabeth Protasio Marcelino supported this view, stating that Filipino Americans are both Filipino and American, sharing significant cultural values and experiences. Madeline Avila Santa Maria highlighted several areas of debate between Salazar and Enriquez, including their perspectives on psychology's relationship with culture, the universality of psychology. She suggested that these differing viewpoints could contribute to the formation of universal knowledge in psychology. Roberto Tanco questioned Psikolohiyang Pilipino's claims of contributing to universal knowledge and raised concerns about its methodology. He argued that it lacks scientific rigor. Sylvia Estrada Claudio criticized the assumption that indigenous cultural elements are inherent and static, advocating for a more critical perspective on culture and psychology that considers power dynamics. She proposed a postmodern or post-colonial approach and discourse analysis. Despite these debates and criticisms, Psikolohiyang Pilipino remains a vibrant field of study, with ongoing research and developments that revise and expand upon its core concepts. Researchers like Grace Orteza and Guanzon La Peña have made contributions to its understanding and application in various areas. While debates continue, Psikolohiyang Pilipino continues to inspire scholars and contribute to the discourse of social sciences in the Philippines. The prevailing psychology considered universal is rooted in Western industrialized countries and seeks to emulate the scientific rigor of natural sciences. This psychology emphasizes observable, measurable, and quantifiable aspects and is often applied to non-Western societies without regard to their unique contexts. Psikolohiyang Pilipino challenges this Western-centric psychology, aiming to develop a truly universal psychology. It acknowledges the scientific nature of psychology, but questions its universality, a concern shared by scholars in other parts of the world like Mexico and in India. Psikolohiyang Pilipino recognizes the value of affirming cultural distinctiveness while striving for universality. It encourages cross-cultural and cross-indigenous perspectives, respecting different cultures' methods and theories. It believes in the objective study of psychology while also contributing to the development of a national culture sensitive to Filipino aspirations. The concept of a universal psychology based on diverse cultures is not new and is promoted by Western psychologists under cross-cultural psychology. However, language and culture barriers hinder its realization. Psikolohiyang Pilipino contributes to a truly universal psychology by embracing diversity and equality. It draws from various cultures' experiences and respects their psychologies as valid and relevant. It generates its hypotheses, theories, and knowledge through indigenous concepts and methods, contributing to the development of a universal psychology that goes beyond Western paradigms. And that ends our presentation. Thank you for listening and have a good day.